Okay, so today you're going to learn about the Dust Bowl, also known as the Dirty 30s. And when you are done, you are going to record a Flipgrid, and you're going to tell what 3 things caused the Dust Bowl to occur, and how the Soil Conservation Act of 1935 helped to make sure that this never happens again. So we're going to find out what caused the Dust Bowl to happen, some of the effects of the Dust Bowl, and how we can keep it from, or how the government worked to end it and to make sure that this never happens again. All right, so you know that in the 1930s, we were also in the middle of the Depression, and there wasn't a lot of money, and people were really struggling just to get by. So on top of all that, we have the Dust Bowl, okay? And the Dust Bowl was the name given to the time in the 1930s when there was a combination of a drought, that means that there was no wind, there was no rain, very, very high winds, and then poor farming, because this was the time when the farmers had new tractors and everything, so they were just plowing up the land and planting tons and tons of crops, and they didn't do it correctly, probably because they just didn't know the effects of what they were doing. And so this led to widespread devastation. The crops were lost due to the topsoil being blown away. And if you look right here at this picture, you can see that the soil is just very, very dry. And when soil is very dry, just the slightest amount of wind will blow it away. So just imagine what strong winds would do. Okay? The drought and erosion of the Dust Bowl affected 100 million acres centered around the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma. So right here in this area, Texas and Oklahoma. It also affected parts of New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. So this area right here was the most hard hit, where there's the dark pink or the bright pink and then the orange. But it was a problem all the way from North Dakota down to Texas. Okay? Here in this picture, you can see the blowing dirt storms that reached as far east as New York and Washington, D.C. So here's a picture of Kansas, and you can just see the wall of dirt behind this man coming into the city. That's how powerful the wind was. It could just bring that dirt up, and it looks like a giant cloud just coming at the people. Black Sunday. On April 14, 1935, a black blizzard hit from Canada to Texas. The dust storms could limit visibility to just a few feet, so you could just barely see in front of you. People could not see to drive. The dirt would fill their nose, their eyes, and their lungs. And we all know how that feels when we get a little bit of dirt in our eyes. It hurts so badly. And they had trouble breathing. They couldn't see. So it was just a really, really bad day. And here is another picture of a dirt storm coming. And these people, I mean, they have no choice. They're just like watching it come for them. They get in the house, close the windows, and pray for the best. The storms, beginning on May 9th, 1934, a strong 2-day dust storm removed topsoil in one of the worst storms in the Dust Bowl. The dust clouds blew all the way to Chicago, where they deposited, that means that 12 million pounds of dirt just fell into the ground. 2 days later, the same storm reached cities in the east. So it was just very, very powerful winds and a lot of dust. And it just traveled that far. In the winter of 1934-1935, red snow fell in the New England states due to all the dirt still in the atmosphere. So yes, the storms are over, but there was so much dirt still in the sky that the snow was actually red. Here's another picture in Spearman, Texas, of the dirt coming on April 14th. Buried in the dirt after the storms died down, the people had to literally dig themselves out. Here is a man digging his fence line. Now this is quite the problem because that's a lot of dirt, and where are you going to put it? I mean, fences are very, very high, and it's not like snow where it's going to just melt and go away. They have to not only dig this out, but they have to find a place to put all this dried dirt, the soil, sand. And, when your car and your tractors and your home and everything are buried, it's just a tough job. So this was very, very hard for them. More, their homes are buried. Wheat, the stalks of the wheat were broken off with the wind and blowing dirt. Roots were blown out of the ground because there's nothing to anchor the plants to the ground. And when plants get dry, they break very easily. And so every time the wind blew, they would break down. The cows, well, they had nothing to eat. Their grass was all dirty and everything, and their stomachs would just fill up with mud. So you can imagine that they probably died from that. In 1934, the Yearbook of Agriculture announced that 100 million acres have lost all or most of their topsoil, so the very top layer of the dirt. Another 125 million acres were about to, and 35 million acres could not grow crops of any kind. So this was just for farmers, complete and total devastation. On top of that, what little crops did survive, the jackrabbits and the grasshoppers would attack and eat. So, think about that. You go out to your farm and there's just tons of jackrabbits and there's tons of grasshoppers, and they're eating what little food or what little crops you had. So the farmers used to have what were called rabbit drives, and they would herd all the rabbits into a fenced-in area and then kill them by hitting them with bats and skillets. Sounds a little barbaric and holy cow, but, survival of the fittest, I guess, at this time. Why did this happen? So we wanted, something had to have caused this to happen. So many new farmers headed west in the Homestead Act, and with the invention of the tractors and the combine, farming was on the rise. So everyone was like, okay, let's farm more land. We learned about that a couple of weeks ago, how the tractors and everything, with those came more people farming. The only problem was that they did not farm responsibly. And it's not because they were being irresponsible, they just didn't know better, okay? And so they would plow the land and the topsoil was turned under for planting. So they were, putting dry soil underneath, making the wet soil on the top, well, then it was drying out. So they were just drying out all the dirt. And there was no way to stop the wind from getting to all this dried up dirt because they didn't have trees, because, we can't have trees in the middle of our farmland. And the soil was very, it wasn't healthy soil because they didn't do crop rotation. And so just all of these things together caused big problems. Here is a farmer and his son who are going to go dig their house out. You can see right here the fences. They're under the ground. They're like walking on top of their fences. The black blizzard struck so suddenly that many farmers became lost in their own fields and suffocated. Some only a few yards from the shelter that they could not see, so the dirt was so dense in the sky that they could not see, and they were suffocating because they were breathing all of this in. And the dirt clogged the car engines. Dirt blew into their homes through the little cracks by the windows, so they would hang wet blankets over the windows, but it didn't help. The hospitals, they were overcome with people with black pneumonia or dust pneumonia and the brown plague because they had so much dirt in their lungs that they were having trouble to breathe because that stuff settles. You can tell by this woman's face how rough it was. We're in the Depression. Now we have the Dust Bowl happening. It's like they just couldn't catch a break. They needed their crops for money, and no crops meant no food. And so they had no money, they had no food, their homes were destroyed. It was just a really, really, really rough time in our country. Another effect from the dust storm was that dust storms crackled with powerful static electricity. So it's kind of like when you go into the store and you touch the metal handles on the freezer. Sometimes you'll get shocked, or when you're walking across your house and you touch someone, you shock them. So that was also happening because the dust would have a positive electricity, ion in it. And so there was so much static electricity that built up between the ground and the dust and the air that blue flames jumped from barbed wire fences and friends shaking hands, they could create sparks that were very, very powerful. They could actually knock people backwards onto the ground. And since static electricity could short out the engines in a car and motorists driving through the dust storms, so because there could be snaps of electricity and everything, you don't want, there to be an electrical pop in your car, because that could, first of all, short out your engine, but it could also cause a fire in your car. So what they would do is they would drag chains from the back of their automobiles to ground out their cars so that there wouldn't be these electrical currents flowing through the car. Hundreds of thousands of people and families were forced to leave their farms. These people were so often known as Okies since they came from Oklahoma. They migrated to California and other states, so they loaded up everything they had and they drove towards California because their life here was just pretty much ruined. About 25% of the population left the affected states by 1940. 2.5 million people had moved out of the Plains states. Okay, and so these were called Dust Bowl refugees, and they moved from Oklahoma to California in 1935. Relief. How are we going to fix this? Well, President Roosevelt's New Deal helped get things back on track, so he really did a lot to bring our country out of the Depression and out of the Dust Bowl. And the rains finally came. The grass began to grow back, and to hold down the soil. They planted trees to serve as windbreaks. The native grasses, that means grasses that grow well in that area, were left alone and replanted, so you're not supposed to dig up, native grasses. And farmers learned to rotate their crops. They also signed into law the Soil Conservation Act. And what this law was, it gave farmers money to plant native grasses, trees, and certain vegetables to protect the soil from soil erosion and kept it from blowing away. Okay, and here's another picture of the dirt. Okay, and there's a book that you can read. Now this also reminds me, because like I said, my parents have a farm around, there's lots of farmland around their house. Something else the farmers will do now to help to protect the land and to protect this from happening again, if they have not a lot of trees and stuff, because there is that part of Texas that it's very, very dry and everything. They take these orange nets to put across the fences right here to block the wind a little bit. Okay, so now you have learned about the Dust Bowl and what caused the Dust Bowl, which was the drought, poor farming methods, and let's go back to this, what caused it. There was the drought, high winds, and poor farming methods. So those are the three things that caused the Dust Bowl to occur. Okay, and then the Soil Conservation Act, let's go back to that slide. I'm going pretty fast here. The Soil Conservation Act gave farmers money to plant native grasses, trees, and certain vegetables to protect the soil from erosion. They also do crop rotation. And all of these things are going to help keep this from happening again if we ever go through another drought, and we don't want this to happen again, okay? So you're going to go to your Flipgrid here in just a second, and you're going to tell me what three things caused the Dust Bowl and what the Soil Conservation Act is and what farmers and our government are doing to prevent the Dust Bowl from ever happening again. All right, I can't wait to see your Flipgrids. Bye!